Welcome, everybody, to a special episode of the Card Insiders podcast. We are here to talk about iOS 15 and its impending changes to the email marketing world. And yes, there are changes that will impact any e-commerce brand who does email marketing. I'm joined on the special episode today by my season-long guest and co-host, e-com veteran and fellow podcaster, Lucas Walker, to discuss what we know, how it will forever change email marketing as we know it, what we don't know, and we'll probably speculate about a couple of things, and then what you can do to prepare your email marketing program now for these changes. Just fully noted, too, there are some questions we just don't know about. I reached out to Apple at time of recording. They have not responded to those requests for comments, so just putting it out there for a future conversation here. So, Lucas, well, before I get there, Lucas, say hi.
Greg, thank you so much for having me for this. I called it the emergency pod, but I think that's a little bit too urgent for it. But we are recording this on a Thursday afternoon. Maybe a bonus pod is a little bit more appropriate as we talk about how opens are dead.
Yeah, absolutely. So opens are dead. Good segue here. Opensardead.com is a really good resource for anything iOS 15 related. What is iOS 15? Well, it's coming out in the fall. Some point this fall, it'll be released by Apple. And really, there's a bunch of privacy things in there. The biggest thing from the email marketing side is that if you're using an Apple Mail app, so it's the app or Apple Mail itself, they are not going to show your individual user open activity. It's going to be hidden from marketers, which makes open rates unreliable metric to monitor. And if it's unreliable, you can't use it. It's pretty much killing off the open rate as we know it. So at the end of the day, opens as we know it are dead. And now we want to prepare for that now. We want to talk about, like, what does that mean for your program? What does it mean that you could do now? What does it mean you should prepare for in 1 month? And then come the fall, hopefully you are well prepared and ready to just rock and roll with those typical things. Now, here's the thing. Who does it apply to, the actual update? Well, if you look at the market share, Lucas, we see in the US, iOS or Apple, the iPhone is about 50% market share, 50% not. Out of that, you have roughly, based on what data you use, roughly about 50% of those users are using the default Mail app or some sort of Apple Mail. So you're looking at maybe 25% of all users. It could be more though, right? I see numbers going up to the 60% range. 25 is more than enough, right? Anything more than like maybe 1% of users, it kills the open rate. So we're having a major impact here. These are things that really marketers look and they go, okay, open rates are one thing. How do we do them? There's a lot of automation. There's a lot of messaging strategy built around open rates. Myself, I was never in love with open rates as a metric. It was just one of those things where I think you can manipulate it too much. Didn't really tell the whole story, but there's a lot of brands that we were talking offline, Lucas, about, which we'll get into here in a couple moments, but like, what is the impact here for how that trickles down? Because there is a huge cascading effect here from a marketing standpoint. Now, you mentioned something to me, Lucas, that you looked at open rates a little bit more than maybe I did, or maybe put more stock in it for different things. Can you tell us your view of open rates and kind of what you used to use those for from a marketing purpose?
Yes, let's take a step back. And the majority of emails I've sent are to either sell software or to sell a natural dog treat. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I use them for the natural dog treat, because that's what we're talking about. So the first thing is, it's really a barometer on health. If I see over time my welcome series or my abandoned cart flow is declining in open rate, then I just use that as a way to go and maybe update my content, try something new. But there's so many things that can impact it. If I have a bunch of junk traffic come to the website and people sign up for my newsletter, or they put in their email and they have no intent of ever purchasing, the open rate's just going to go down naturally, regardless of anything else. The other thing is, I would use it for coming up with new subject lines to see what's working, making sure that it's still relevant. But there's always a bit of a dice roll. You can have the best subject line in the world, and in a one-off send, it might not have the same open rate because of any other number of external factors. And I think that's really important to remember. If you go and look at your campaigns and your automations, and you look at your open rate, your clicks, and your revenue, those numbers are related, but some of the most profitable emails I sent had surprisingly low open rates. And I think that segueing into one thing that email marketers can and should be doing is using the next few months to really clean up and just look at the overall quality of their list. I think that we're all guilty of trying to get people to open one more email or make one more purchase. But if you're looking now and they haven't opened your last 50 emails, maybe unsubscribe them. Maybe send them a re-engagement campaign now while you are still looking at that. But that's such a low priority in the grand scheme of things that the metric itself for open rates, it's really a barometer, less so than what really matters. So I think that the more seasoned of an email marketer I've become and talking to other veterans, it really, and I don't want to undersell it because there are a lot of bigger implications down the road, but it's not the end all and be all of your email marketing metrics.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you because it was one of these things where when I was helping other brands improve their programs, they would say, "Hey, do you have industry benchmarks on open rates?" And I would say, "Don't look at them, right? Because you have no idea how someone else treats their list." You mentioned re-engagement, right? Have they opened the last 50 messages? Well, some people have those. Some people clean them out regularly, right? You don't know how they're doing the list.
Yeah,
That
if
was the
you
thing
go
that,
in and you see someone has 100,000 emails on their list and a 2% open rate, you can probably get that up to 10% and 5x it pretty easily just by cleaning the list and segmenting a little bit more.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I used to tell them, I'm like, okay, let me create one segment for you. I'll get you an 80+% open rate. And they would look at me and they would go, "There's no way." And I, one segment, right? But you can manipulate that. I'll create you a segment of the most engaged people and you send to them, right? And 80% are probably opening because they are the most
And it's like
engaged.
that old joke. I think Michael Scott did this on The Office. I can get anyone on the phone, anyone in the world. Obama, Queen of England, doesn't matter. I just need to get through to them that their children are in trouble and that they've been kidnapped. Like that'll get it open. That doesn't mean that it's a good thing. If you send the email subject line urgent, something in our product may have killed your dog. That's going to get a huge open rate, but it's not going to sell a lot of product.
Well, it's a funny example, but it's a really good example of what comes next. And I think this is where I'm not celebrating, but I'm glad the open rates are kind of going away. Omnisend, we've been looking at this for a long time, and we've had this notion that relevant marketing will trump anything, right? So we're always looking at the next thing. Relevant marketing will generate more clicks will generate more conversions. That's what we're focused on. Subject line is just a part of that, and subject lines are not going away, and that's the important thing to look at. You mentioned
Apple's
kind of
not blocking you from sending emails. And let's look at another player in the game, which is Google. They serve up ads in Gmail. They could be just as likely to throttle and make it pay to play like what happened with Facebook and organic reach. So I
mhm.
think that it's the compelling event that is getting a lot of marketers to either take the action that they've been sleeping on or really reinforce the smart habits that they've been doing for the past couple of years. But they're not blocking emails.
Correct. And I think that's the important point to note here. So, what do we do leading up until this fall season? Well, I would tell you continue to test subject lines for now and just try to if you haven't
Mhm.
done it yet, try to get a benchmark about which ones tend to work better than others. And you said you could send one email and it gets terrible opens one day, but it's a really good email for you, or it's a really good subject line that's worked elsewhere. You can have the opposite. But if you get a general baseline about, hey, emojis, right, things like this that work, once those opens go away, those metrics go away, you at least have a little bit of confidence that your subject line is a little more tactical and a little more strategic, that hopefully you can generate the opens whether you track them or not. I think the other things that you should prepare for from the very short term are think about those open based messages. So we talk about booster sends or
Mhm.
remails as they're known. So we automatically send messages to non openers of the original message. We change the subject line. We send that, 48 hours later. Those things are going to be irrelevant because you can't control those once the update happens. So start planning your marketing calendars and start planning to live in a remail less world, if you will. Send time optimization, something Omnisend has kind of not done in the past because we didn't think it mattered all that much.
I and I'm going to say this with a grain of salt, but I tried different times, different everything. It made such a small difference. The most important thing is just to send the email. If you
Yes.
do more good promotion, people tend to like it. You can send it at 11 at night. You can send it at 11 in the morning. And I was sending to a decent sized list, and it didn't make that big of a difference. If you're trying to think that, by sending it at this specific time, I'm going to make so much more money. It's just being in the right place at the right time, and at some point increasing relevant frequency.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny because I found the exact same thing with send time optimization as well. Sometimes it made no difference. Sometimes if it made a difference, mostly it was marginal at best, which I would say marginal is still better than nothing, but
It is.
it's somewhat anecdotal as well.
It's a lever you can pull.
Yep.
But it's not the most important or the biggest lever you should be pulling. If you're relying on send time to be the difference between your business going under or having a 7-figure profit, there's probably a lot of other stuff ducks in a row you need.
Absolutely. I think the other thing is if you're using any sort of real-time content delivery system where maybe it's a countdown timer, for instance, or something with knowing its IP addresses will be hidden. Now you'll still get that general geographic range from all tells, but it's going to not be quite as specific to your individual user.
But you know what I found with IP address was the shipping location was far more important. The country and even city to break it down, especially running from an e-commerce perspective. IP is pretty important in SaaS, but I found that there were already better ways to get the location data.
Yeah. Now, if you don't have, say, they're not a past customer, right, and they're say you have something in a welcome series, or even just a real-time content in a Tuesday promotional message to a non-customer, you have some impact there. So I would say
Yes.
we'll probably have to use that pretty cautiously. But my guess is most real-time content, there might be some exceptions, but most real-time content, if it's based on anything with open or location, is likely to be skewed for you as well. So I think these are some of the immediate impacts where you should start planning now for not doing these things in the future. Send time or real-time content might be one of those odd exceptions, but for the most part, send time optimization, remails, these things are kind of a way of the past as well come this fall. The other thing I would say is, we're talking about like the death of the open rate. I would say don't panic. So this goes into best practices. We just as marketers are generally adapting to new changes. We get iOS changes, but there's changes beyond, like Google caching images, back in 2013. That was a huge revolutionary thing. Before that, you had to click enable images. Otherwise, it was bulletproof buttons and 60/40 text to image ratio and HTML text and all this stuff. And it was, those emails were ugly. And then they started caching images. And it's like, well, boom, I can do image-based messages. So I would say don't panic. Like, changes happen all the time. It's just a matter of adjusting mindsets and learning some new practices, which ultimately will make you a better marketer.
Well, that's the thing. You have to step your game up anyway. Just competition is always coming up. The same tactics I use while launching my business in 2014 are not the ones that I would use today.
Yes, 100%. 100%. I mean, you think about emojis, way back when it was scary for people to do. And now it's, 20 emojis in a subject line, 20 in a pre-header text. And that's the only thing there. And it's inboxed all day long,
Yeah.
So, don't panic. If you're a marketer, this is not a bad thing. I would say it's a good thing to really focus on your customer, focus on generating that click. Now, here's some of the things we do not know with the new update to the iOS 15 update. You mentioned it before, Lucas, with ReEngagement. The reason we do ReEngagement or we look at open rates is to figure out, are we getting to the inbox or are we getting to the bulk folder? So deliverability is a huge component here that, as a company, we are working through, and we'll have, check out opensaredead.com. We'll continue to put information out there as well. But this is just one of those question marks. So from my standpoint, I did say that I didn't look at opens a whole lot, to the degree and give it the level set, but we were talking as well. And opens are a good indication. If you're used to, say, a 15% open rate, and one day you go in there and you see 2, I'll guarantee you're in Gmail's inbox or junk folder, bulk folder. It was a really good indication. If we can't see that now, and we can't say, okay, they haven't opened the last 50 emails because we don't know what client they're using, or Apple's, showing us 100% open rate. We can't realistically do that deliverability like we used to. We can't monitor the health of there. And the feedback loops get shut off, right? Or they're not actively communicating. it kind of leaves marketers a bit of a dark place. So there are some ramifications there. I don't know what's going to happen with that. I don't have an answer for you, but I don't know if you have any insights about maybe ways to counteract that, Lucas. Any insights you want to give on the deliverability aspect here?
Yeah, and I'm going to get a little bit technical and a little bit into the weeds, but what I would do now is export all my sends and track my historical open rates and see what that drop off is, and presumably that'll be pretty steady. So that'll be the first thing that I do is, so if, let's say my open rates are at 50% and they drop down to 25%, just to use nice round numbers, then 25 is sort of my new baseline. And if that changes drastically, that's what I would be looking at. The other more important thing though is those engagements. And so obviously sales from a flow or a campaign, clicks, but also the other thing is replies. And I always knew a good email when I had a ton of replies to it. So I think adding reply as a call to action or just asking a question will help you identify which emails are doing really well and then tracking that to revenue as well.
That's a really smart thing to say there as well, is monitoring those replies. So we mentioned before that clicks will kind of become the new standard for your baseline metric, right? So you can't really do click to open rate because we might not be tracking the clicks, the opens there, but we will see.
But when was and this is just started to cut you off, Greg, but when was the last time somebody sent an email without something to click or some sort of call to action? I'm trying to think in my inbox the last time that I saw one from a brand that was just have a nice day, no, nothing else.
I got one a couple weeks ago. You'd be surprised.
Really?
Doesn't happen that much, but
Like,
I do come across emails where they either forget to code it, like say it's just one image based, one they forget to code the call to action or whatever. I still come across them. It's unbelievable. It's
maybe
not.
the odd
It's not like one a
transactional
day,
email,
right?
but it's very rare, and I assume that the listeners listening to a podcast about how to get better at email marketing are not the ones sending out
you
dead
you
end
would hope.
emails.
You would hope. No, if they're an Omnisend customer, I guarantee you they're doing all right there. But you're right. So if we're looking at, say, clicks percent, having that monitor, but to your point, you could always aggregate that. So you said export that data, right? So we know we have a 25% open rate and we get this amount of clicks, right? What that percentage is. So if you know you're getting, say, a 2% open rate, which you don't know, but you're getting bulk mailed, if you're seeing those clicks kind of follow suit, they should drop off a cliff as well. So that might be your indication on the deliverability side. Just it's not as maybe intuitive as, say, a 1% open rate is. The interesting part here is that Apple, in their documentation, tells marketers and brands to monitor open rates as an indicator of list health. And they recommend cleaning lists that you have people not opening. So it's unknown what the ramifications there is, but it's something they've recommended doing, and now they're taking that away. So there's going to be something. I would assume that there's some sort of feedback there. We'll just have to wait and see here as well. We also don't know kind of what you mentioned Gmail before and Google, like what they will do afterward, right? Will they follow suit to kind of go with this privacy bandwagon? Will they kind of roll that into their own ecosystem? Which, I mean, in some degree, we've got to believe that Apple is rolling this in to push people to, say, Apple News or something, right? Where they can, your data is money to them, right? Your data is money to everyone. So Apple is not doing this because they love you. They're doing it because there's probably ulterior motive there. We don't know if Google will do this as well. It doesn't really matter from an open rate perspective, but like what's that next shoe to drop? Even with Apple, what's that next shoe to drop? We just don't know the long-term impact here. Even the long-term impact of Gmail inbox placement versus bulk foldering, right? If we can't monitor and clean our list healthy, and Google is still using that open rate perspective as an indicator of health, are we going to fall under a trap on Gmail because we're not cleaning our list on our side? So there's a lot of moving pieces here that we don't know, but there are certain things we can do now to start preparing for those things. I mentioned living in a remail list world and preparing for that stuff, but the immediate next steps, right? I think first is a shift in mindset. Focus on the opens less, focus on clicks more, the metrics that matter. You mentioned it before, Lucas, re-engagement. Like do those re-engagement campaigns now. Haven't opened 50 emails. Let's go ahead and automate those, or let's send the campaign out to those. Let's try to clean our list before this becomes more problematic for you. So,
and that's so the way that I would do my re-engagement campaigns is I would start at 50 and then 25 and try to find where that sweet spot was. And I would just be very candid and say, hey, you sign up for our list at some point. Notice you haven't opened our emails recently. Are we sending too much? What can we do better? Let me know. I read every single one of them. And a lot of people did reply saying, "Oh no, it's something else," or stuff. But then they were brought back in. And if people haven't replied or anything, you clean up your list and you make it better. But it's also a smart way to educate customers and say, "Hey, if you stop seeing us in your inbox, this is why." Because I was shocked at how many customers said, "No, I signed up thinking I was going to buy a dog 2 years ago, but I haven't yet. But as soon as I do, we want to buy some treats." And then 6 months later, I'd get an order out of nowhere, and I'd say, "Oh, that name looks kind of familiar. Do I know them?" And I'd check my inbox, and sure enough, they'd responded to that email after being on the list for 2.5 years. So I think a cleaning your list now, but also educating your list on what's going to happen, and say, "Hey, if you notice your inbox is a lot cleaner down the road, or that our emails aren't there, this is why." Make sure you're opted in. And if you really want to keep in touch with us, you can sign up to our SMS list here.
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up in about 5 minutes here. Let's jump in that now because that is one of the easy things to do now is start growing your SMS list. So one, if you do unsubscribe people through the re-engagement campaign, you have another communication touch point potentially for those people. But two, as you start growing that at the onset, the welcome messages or running a campaign, right, to your general subscribers to get them to opt into your SMS program, you create that other touch point. So if you have an automated message that is sending, rather than saying, okay, did they open this message? And if not, resend it. If they did send them this, we can start incorporating the SMS, that other channel, into those. So it provides different options back and forth. And you can even use those piggybacking, right? You can say, hey, if you're, be sure to use SMS to drive people to email so they do see those things and start opening them. So if there are those open rate issues with, say, Gmail or something, you're driving people there to keep those high. So I think SMS is a must here. I think it's a must anyways, but I think this is a must for kind of living this open rate less world.
And we've talked about, is it too early for SMS? Is it too late? I think this accelerated it by about 6 months. I
Yeah.
think we were both on the same page of, well, if you're not really using it, at least start collecting them now and then get into it next year around the holidays. Now's the time to start actively and warming up your list to SMS.
Yeah, absolutely. So start collecting it again, where you're collecting email addresses, pop-up forms, exit intent, whatever you are doing there, and start growing that and using that channel and figuring out how, especially with the automations, how they're interacting now when you can still track open rates to figure out, okay, what's the percentage of people who are opening this, say, welcome message, and can I get them this SMS there? And kind of figure those things out now while you can. I think the somewhat ironic part about this, Lucas, is we talk about, hey, marketers need to be adaptive and they need to learn new things and unlearn old practices like relying on the open rate for everything. The ironic part here is I think people need to get back to basics, the marketers. They need to start thinking maybe a little more constructive about how to craft a very strong subject line, how to utilize pre-header text to complement the subject line, how to write strong call to actions and use, product recommendation, like all these very basic optimization tactics that is kind of like email 101 that you learn when you get thrown into the job. It's like we are becoming more advanced and we are becoming very 101 at the exact same time, which I find really ironic and very interesting from a industry perspective.
No, I agree 100%. Copywriting has never been more important. And it's when people can get similar products in so many places, it's the fundamentals that matter most, because that's the differentiator. Everyone is on a fairly level playing field when it comes to the tech. It's that raw talent that will set you apart. And if you have a really good writer on staff that all their emails tend to outperform others, give them a promotion, give them the reins to take over. Thinking back to the episode of Carton Setters with Carrots, they have a small team. If someone on that team tends to just write really good emails, let them write more emails. That's their bread and butter, and that's what they're great at.
So let's revert back to kind of the simplistic. Let's convert that to go back to the basics. Go back to how do we increase the clicks? How do we increase the conversions? How do we sell our product? How do we engage people? So that's really cool. The other thing where we've been preaching this, I've been preaching it for years, Omnisend, obviously, but like you mentioned, we're kind of in a level playing field to some degree. Automated messages. This is going to be, I think, critical if we look out a year from now and say, okay, how did the 6 months since this transpired, what is happening? I think automated messages is where brands are going to be able to increase their sales here. So, I mean, just last year, we're tracking open rates and things like that, but in 2020, 29% of all email orders came on from automated messages. They were less than 2% of sends. That shouldn't change because they're relevant. They're naturally getting high click rates. They're naturally getting high conversion rates because they're relevant messages sent at the right time to the right customer. And this time, if you use SMS and email together, the right channel. So, if you haven't done so yet, start knocking these automated messages out. Get them implemented. Get them driving. See what the benchmarks are now, so you can iterate and optimize as you move forward. Welcome messages, browse, card post, lapse purchase. This season of the podcast, shameless plug, you mentioned Carrots a minute ago, which came out just the other day. This season is all about how brands are implementing these things and how they're maximizing conversions off them. So go ahead and give that a listen if you haven't yet. But I think automated messages, like this is one of those stalwarts that are just going to be here, and it's going to be even more important, I think, to get that relevant messaging moving forward. Do you see it the same way?
100%. It's just taking care of and I feel like I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but it's taking care of the fundamentals and making sure you still have a quality welcome email. Go and check now and see if email number 3 in your welcome series tends to generate more revenue. What's going on with the first two? Are the open rates still happening? Are they more educational? Just look now, and those trends won't change, and you have access to that historical data.
So I will say this: you are a marketer, so this answer will probably be skewed, Lucas.
It will be very skewed. I can tell you. I don't even know what the question is, but the answer is yes. It's very skewed.
So I was talking to my wife the other day, and she kind of shrugs her shoulders and she says, "Well, who cares?"
Do you watch her browse the internet and use her phone, like not in a creepy way, but in a hey, what are you doing over there? You just clicked an Instagram ad. What's going on? No, just ignore me. Just ignore me.
I'm right behind her right now. I was explaining this whole thing to her. Hey, they're not going to allow us to track opens anymore. Open rates are pretty much dead. And she goes, "Who cares if they know I'm opening my message?" Do you see it that way? Or are you more on the privacy guy, being like, hey, you know what? That's cool.
So both. Sometimes I purposely try to get cookied and see what ads are coming at me. Sometimes I hit the privacy for whatever reason, depends on how I'm feeling on the day. But the thing is, I like some personalization. I wear a lot of hats, like literal baseball caps. And so if I go to the lid store, I don't really want to see the Baltimore Orioles or the Yankees. I want to see the Toronto Blue Jays. So for things like that, I kind of like it. But in general, there are so many data points out there that I feel like people know they're being watched or followed online or cookied is probably the better phrase, that I think a lot of them just hit the default sure. I think a lot of people just truly don't really care.
I tend to agree. I don't care if people are opening. Obviously, Apple's still going to monitor it. They'll know I'm opening. I personally don't care because I think to me, the value of more targeted messaging, if they know what I'm engaging with, they know what I'm opening, makes sense to me. Sometimes I don't open a message because I don't see it, or it gets buried, or I get busy, and then I get the remail, a day or two later, and it appeals to me, and I'm like, oh yeah, I meant to go back to that. And not getting those remails now, I think, puts a pretty big challenge on e-commerce brands.
Yeah, I think that'll be the biggest challenge to overcome is sending the remails to the customers who wanted it but just happened to miss the first one. I think that'll be the biggest issue, and I think that's going back to what we were talking on earlier. And if you only take away one thing from this episode, use this as the reason to start driving SMS collections from your top fans and your top customers that truly don't want to miss something. Because if you just say, "Hey, give me your phone number," it's weird and creepy. But if you say, "Hey, there's some changes coming to emails. We want to make sure that you never miss a message. If you want to get the most exclusive, the most guaranteed, highest discounts, whatever your buying triggers are, opt into our SMS numbers here." And you could even run a campaign and an automation on that to start collecting those SMS numbers now. Because once you have a reason to do something, your success rates just go up even further.
I'll add to it because I would say if there's one thing to take away, the SMS is a big one. The second one, in my opinion, is automated messages, right? That is, if you're not doing it or you have it bare boned, right, which is a great thing, keep on optimizing those before it gets to the fall season and people start downloading this and installing it and opting out of those tracking behaviors. So, just to recap, iOS 15 is coming out in the fall. We don't know exactly when, but probably September, October-ish. And email open rates are now going to be dead because of that. So look beyond the open. We have tons of iOS 15 information, and we'll keep it updated at opensaredead.com. That's opensaredead.com. Of course, you can always visit us at our website, omnisend.com. We'll have all that information there for you as well. We live in an interesting world. We live in an interesting time. There's always change. And I always joke around, like, email doesn't really move that fast. It tends to grow like heart abandonment. It grew over this, 8 to 10 year span. And it took how long before images were enabled by default? And then here we are seemingly overnight, and it has changed and has changed fundamentally forever, which I think is a cool thing. We're living in a great time. You know what I mean? It's like me trying to explain to my kids that YouTube didn't exist 15 years ago. And they're like, what? This is a pivotal moment in email marketing, which is very cool. So before we cut out of here, Lucas, how about some final thoughts? Anything you want to say? I know you mentioned the SMS a minute ago, but like any advice to brands out there who might be either worried about it, struggling with it, words of encouragement? How would you leave iOS 15 and maybe what we're going to see in the future?
I have something, and it's so preachy that I don't want to sound obnoxious saying it, but I'm going to anyway. Go pick up a book on copywriting or just buyer psychology, whether it's Influenced by Robert Cialdini. And when I was talking about the reason for opting into SMS, he references this study where somebody's trying to cut in line to make some copies at a photocopier, and if you say, "Hey, can I go ahead?" most people say no. But if you say, "Hey, can I go ahead because I need to make some copies?" more people say yes. And if you say, "Hey, can I go ahead because I need to make some copies? I'm in a hurry and I only have 5," 97% or something crazy like that of people let you cut in line. So that's a great book. Copywriter's Handbook is another one. I'm just looking at my bookshelf behind me. Use this as a reason to just learn something new. I'll plug the Omnisend Academy as well. Just brush up on your best practices to make sure you're bringing the best tools in your tool chest or your tool belt with you for these changes.
Awesome. I love the advice, and I think another behavioral marketer, Nancy Harhut, shout out to Nancy here. I've known her for a few years, but really cool. So yeah, read some books, bone up on those best practices, do all the stuff you just talked about. I think it's a great opportunity for people. And obviously we've got tons of resources for you as well at omnisend.com and opensaredead.com. Hey, if you do have any questions for us, you can email us at podcast@omnisend.com. You can email us questions about iOS 15. You can email us questions about the podcast, but feel free to reach out to us. We want to make that available to you and answer any questions that you might have on pending changes, what's going on with the Omnisend product, whatever it might be. So I would say to everyone, don't panic, stay calm and relax, but let's embrace this new world of relevant marketing because frankly, it's better for everyone involved. And that's really what it's all about. Relevant marketing is going to drive the day. It's going to drive the future. We've been on that from a mission standpoint from Omnisend since day one, and we believe it. And now it's kind of coming true for us, which makes us feel good. So if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Give us a 5-star rating if you haven't. Until next time, have a great day and be kind to one another.